Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Well, I'm very pleased to be speaking to one of my favorite people, a new person in my life, and one of my favorite people, Jasmine Anouna. And I'm going to do a little bit of reading here. Not my preference, but this is from her bio, which she's self-proclaimed not so good at this piece, but I think she's wrong. So here, Jasmine is an intersectional feminist researcher, which we will speak about, writer and founder of The Bloom, a global impact community for young changemakers. As an Italian Egyptian American, her fire, I love that, her fire comes from building creative bridges between cultures, people, and ideas. In 2019, she graduated with honors from the University of Oxford with a Master in Gender Studies. Her dissertation wove together her passions for women's rights and technology, exploring how social media is a tool for peace building. Italy. Is that peace building in Italy? Peace building, yeah. Italy. Cool. The research served as a basis for her participation as a speaker in numerous events, including the International Women's Festival in Florence in 2019. I'm going to butcher this, Libreria del Done in Milan in 2019, the Conference of Social Policy and Public in Italy in Cambridge in 2019, and regarding future IT, I think that's correct, San Francisco 2020. In 2019, Jasmine's unique specialization at the intersection of social media and women's rights brought her to work at the United Nations Office of Human Rights in Geneva. It was during this time, from a storage closet, I hope you weren't double dipping, from a storage closet at the UN that she launched her company, The Bloom, to address what she observed is a critical issue in the impact world, the absence of a global resource and community where young people can find innovative and diverse opportunities for positive impact. Since going full-time on The Bloom, Jasmine has grown the community across borders to more than 3,000 young people in over 56 countries. The Bloom's mission is to become the world's leading go-to resource to find opportunities and inspiration to make a social impact, a positive impact. And again, welcome, Jasmine, and to all of our many listeners. who knows? And thanks for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate it. So
thank you. I'm grateful to be here.
So I know your age is not relevant, but you've accomplished a lot in a short period of time. Yeah, I think you've accomplished a lot in a short period of time. So before I try to cross-examine you, which is not really my intent at all, but to ask about some of those things that you wrote, to what do you attribute this ability to, or this phenomenon of you accomplishing quite a bit in a short period of time?
That's a good question. Well, one obvious answer is that I had very, very strict parents. I mean, my mom very much, like, one of the main things that I was infused with as a kid was just, honor your privilege by just doing your job and being a good student. Pay attention, not because of necessarily just the grades, but because you come from a very privileged background. And by that, I mean, I did grow up with a roof over my head and food on the plate, and I didn't have to worry about money in a day-to-day basis. And that in itself should be a good impetus to, honor that life and give it a chance. But I think at a more, that's at a basic level. And I think so that it really did instill in me a lot of discipline, but on a more deeper spiritual level, I think that I just very much love life, and I love honoring, I think that I took that that basis and did make it a bit more spiritual, in that I live with urgency. And for me, that means just kind of always staying perceptive of what I can do, how many connections I can make in what I read and what I observe, and putting that into action. And then just also just being a very curious person who wants to take what I learn and like do something about it.
What do you mean when you say you live with urgency?
Uh,
Do you mean are you pointing at something like the situation in the world is dire, or there is much to act urgently about, or do you mean something else?
it means many things, but the first thing that does come to mind is that life is a damn gift, and that we don't know how long we're here for. I don't know if I'll die tomorrow, or I mean, next week. And I just want to know that I lived my life to the fullest. And I think that honoring life for me means living urgently. I used to equate that with like speed of life, where you had to go, go, go. And that was a mistake in many ways. It was just something I had to unlearn. Going faster doesn't necessarily mean that you're still living with urgency. You can go slow and live urgently. And that honoring life doesn't necessarily mean like doing everything all at once. But it just means taking your time, and doing things well and being fully present when you do them. Like here right now, and just like taking my time with my answers with you, and really like thinking about what you say and what you're asking. Yeah, I think that's that's one part.
I used to have a website and a blog I called it slowseat.com. I guess maybe it was .org. And the tagline was, because sometimes the fastest way to get there is to go slowly. So I agree.
Yeah,
Interesting.
the fastest way to get there too is slow. It's not an easy philosophy and also seed of wisdom to upkeep in life. And I think even just like, especially living in a city like New York, the pressure is very much against that, and the currents go completely in the opposite like flow. But if you repeat it enough, it gets easier. But I do still like feel that part of me that's like, you have to keep going, and that guilt of like not going faster and doing more in a day. But it's an active process, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, what is, you described yourself right off the bat, at least in that thing you wrote, as an intersectional feminist.
Mhm.
So what do you mean by intersectional, and what do you mean by feminist?
Well, intersectional is just a lens of looking at life, recognizing that we come, and many of us come with multiple intersectional identities. I'm not just I'm actually 25, by the way. I got my own age wrong. It's still too early. I think the pandemic has me stuck at 24.
Was your birthday recent?
No, no. Yeah.
Time to update the software.
Yeah, you might want to update this. But what was I saying? So intersectional is just a way of looking at, it's a lens to look at life, but it's also just a way people inevitably have to live their life if you exist across multiple intersections that are more. It is a way of looking at life that is more holistic, recognizing that, what are the multiple identities that someone comes to you with. And like, I am not just a 25-year-old young woman. I'm also Middle Eastern. I'm also Italian. I'm also, these things are part of my intersections. And I think that recognizing that race, class, gender, disability, sexuality, these all play a role in shaping our lived experiences. And for some, usually when it comes to multiple marginalized intersections, it just means that there's a lot more structural like forces at play, probably against you. So it's a heightened awareness of holistic.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. It's okay. It's okay. It's a heightened awareness of a holistic experiences and identities that someone brings with them, recognizing that you are not just also your identities, but also the structural barriers that that you've faced. And yeah.
And is there anyone that is not intersectional? I mean, it's an interesting word, and
There are
especially the
some
way it's.
people that intersect with more identities, and there's some that intersect with less.
But
You know, there's if for example, there are differences between if I am a Black Muslim disabled woman, it's a bit different than being a white cis man.
right, but
Yeah.
it's rare that so I guess this is I'm both curious and uh well, I'm curious and I'm not sure what that blank is. Um, it's an interesting thing to me that it's surfaced recently, or if it's resurfaced recently,
Mm-hmm.
as a term that is common,
Mm-hmm.
more commonly used. It seems to be used primarily um, to refer to the more than simply one identity, uh, but those identities are, for lack of a better word, oppressed,
Mm-hmm.
disadvantaged, etc.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
one never hears, right? When I don't hear anyone referring any highly privileged person
Mm-hmm.
referring to him or herself as intersectional.
No.
And so I'm curious about that piece, not necessarily from
Mm-hmm.
you, but just the way it's made its way back into the world. And
Mm-hmm.
and the other piece is, you know, and I don't mean this in any sort of a pejorative way, but it seems
Mm-hmm.
like it's a mundane idea, right?
Mm.
That people are. I mean, isn't it obvious?
In
I don't
what
mean one.
way
Isn't it
is it
obvious that
mundane?
people are multiple things?
No. Were
It's
you
not.
taught how were you taught in your history classes? Were you
Well,
taught history in an intersectional way? Or?
I went to one of those schools that
Uh,
that
but
was
you were privileged enough
awake.
to go to the way that people are taught is not in an intersectional way. The way that the default education across so many different countries is very linear, very
Right.
black and white, in a way that is taught from the perspective and also to an audience of the same like nature, being in a very like privileged position. History is not like, usually, at least in my classes, I wasn't like lucky enough to be taught in a very progressive way and like looking at history across multiple views. The way that I was taught about climate change, I wasn't taught about like how climate, the intersection of like climate, refugee crisis, history, and this kind of. I was taught about climate change in a very like white, like very linear, very, let's say, safe way. These are people that are, they don't tell you why people are like the actual roots of it and looking at an issue with multiple lenses. You know what I mean? Like it's yeah,
So
it's not.
is it fair to say that um, you are in an ongoing way, not that it's a done process, but then
Mhm.
in an ongoing way, trying to see things both from the perspective of Jasmine Anouna, a unique individual who is lucky enough and unlucky enough to be the person she is, in addition to sort of larger forces, larger flow
um
of things, right? Because
I think
you're not eliminating your unique individuality, right? I mean, it's
no.
not. Yeah,
No, but I think I'm just, because of my awareness of an intersectional approach, and also with like the feminist side of things, which is also, oh, and that was another part of your question. For
yeah.
me, it just means understanding as many. I don't have to necessarily understand, but I have to be receptive and I have to be open. And I just listening, I think, is very key. Listening to multiple, understanding that there is so much nuance, like within the disability rights movement, for example, there's just so much nuance. Like, no, there is no one story of what it means to be disabled in America. There are so many types of disabilities. Like, you wouldn't want to reduce it to one type of, well, disabled people all face XYZ. That's not true. That disabled folks like face many different kinds of oppression, and there is so much nuance within that, right? So I think why I say intersectional, and by the way, with these terms, like I say it because it's something I'm aspiring to, but I don't claim to be an expert in intersectionality. I don't claim to be an expert feminist. These are just words that I want to associate because it's something that I aspire to like really integrate into my own life, but it's an ongoing work in process. So I'm by no means an expert in any of these topics. All I know is that nuance is key with everything. And intersectionality, just inevitably by the term, it's important to just, and I don't think it's mundane to like use it. I think it's a nice reminder in the same way that you would want to remind yourself to like take your time. And that this, going back to our initial like points, it's an ongoing process kind of repeating to yourself and reminding yourself of certain ways of looking at life and certain principles that you want to keep applying, you know.
Do you feel like there's a pushback against that? Like, do you feel the pushback against that, your inclination to incorporate those things in yourself or to point them out in the work you do, or
like a pushback against nuance?
so do you feel that? I mean, are you aware of that?
But just to see if I've understood your question, you're saying, is there a pushback against nuance?
Against nuance, against seeing the world from an intersectional perspective.
I think there's actually growing movement, especially with young people. I have so much faith in like Gen Z and millennials too. I mean, I think that there's a lot more awareness as to like that the way to fight climate change is not to be stuck in one narrative, but actually to look at like people that face multiple discriminations across multiple intersections. So people of color that are disabled in this country have actually had like are very resourceful in the sense of understanding climate change, like looking to these kinds of communities that have the ones that have like literally faced like the worst kind of possible traumas because of like climate, and how they their creative like problem solving is probably going to be a lot more effective than, for example, a white suburban family in like New Jersey that isn't disabled and they're just like able-bodied. I think that there's a lot more receptivity with young people to these kinds of narratives. However, I do think that among very progressive folks, that I mean, the pushback against nuance, I do see that, and I see it mostly in ironically in people that have extremely like supposedly very progressive views. I mean, it doesn't even matter if you have progressive views or not. I think that there's just a tendency now to be very dismissive, which is something that we've talked about in our personal conversations too. Dismissive of nuance because there's just this sense of entitlement that comes with understanding certain things about the world and feeling so confident in your convictions that you are not willing to have a conversation if it doesn't wholly match what you believe, which is tough. And I think that that's both on like the conservative side and the progressive side that does happen. Yeah. And I have seen it. I've experienced it. I myself have been dismissed in my new, like, you know, it happens that it's just.
Say more. What does that mean? You've been dismissed in what ways?
Well,
you mean by people who are sort of, well, whatever, though, by people who are in power or by people who are aspiring towards power?
By peers sometimes. I haven't always seen eye to eye. I mean, I try to I think I'm more accommodating, but also because I haven't had to justify my existence my whole life. So if you have had to do that your whole life, you're probably pretty exhausted by the time you're an adult. So I would say I have a bit more energy for bullshit in the sense that I feel like compared to some of my like friends that are, you know, also like very progressive, I guess I have a bit more tolerance to having conversations with people that have very different views and just being curious. There's a phrase that I always like to repeat, which is like, get curious or go crazy, which was also inspired by Brene Brown. And I guess I'm just like more willing to be curious than go crazy with certain views. But again, that's also because like I don't face so much discrimination because I'm also like white passing. And I mean, Middle Eastern is, I don't know, like I don't even know, honestly.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like, it's complicated.
You get to walk in a lot of
I do.
lanes for
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah,
I
it's
do.
mostly with peers.
Do you worry? Do you worry about, or maybe it's too soon to worry. I was going to say, do you worry about the consequence of um, people more and more positioning themselves, holding themselves closely to those affinity groups? Affinity is not
Mm,
quite the right word, but those identity groups, um, and the sort of the growing, but the consequences being many, right?
mm,
Siloism of ideas, of associations, of
mm.
positionality, I mean, sort of combat. Do you see a danger there, or is it too
Well,
soon for that danger to rise to a level that is something to worry about?
I hear you. I think that with certain like identities, it's very hard not to be constantly reminded of what you are and who you are. Like if I'm a disabled person in New York, I am going to have to face the like my disability is going to be screaming in my face because the city has like no infrastructure for disabled folks. So if I'm trying to go from like point A to point B, and I've watched quite a few YouTube videos about this, very interesting, but like and also just very sad. It's just like for an able-bodied person to go from like, I don't know, some part of Brooklyn to come into Manhattan, it takes like 30 minutes. For a person that's disabled, if you can't use your legs and you're in a wheelchair, for example, because there's also many different types of disability, but if you're in a wheelchair and you need to go from Brooklyn to Manhattan, it's probably going to be like a 3-hour trip. And you face that identity like on an everyday basis. So I think that and that's what privilege is, right? Privilege means not being able to reconcile and also think about your identity because it's not part of your everyday life, because you don't have to, because the system is made for you, the default is made for you such that you can go about your day and not think about it, right? Like you don't have to think like about yourself in that way, that you're like not different. The city's made for you, so you don't necessarily have to think about yourself, you can think about other things, um you know so in that way, I think it depends. Uh, but for the most part, I think that it is like not being able to think about, not having to think about identity in many ways is a privilege in
It's
itself.
interesting. I had a conversation here where I live. I may have told you this, but I don't remember. Because it's odd that it's interesting that you're pointing at able and disable. I years ago I was in Chile for about 2.5, 3 months, and one of the people I was traveling with was a woman in a wheelchair,
Mm.
and the curbs in the streets were enormous. I mean, they were incredibly high. I mean, getting up on the curb,
Oh
you
God.
had to lift your, it was amazing. And this was before the days of widespread, and I don't know if it's still that way now, well, curb cuts. And it
Mm.
dawned on me at the time, is like, look, there's a lot of things wrong with a lot of different places, or wrong, not to my liking. But I wonder if you could sort of, a measure of the generosity of a society, of the
Mhm.
values of a society, curb
Mhm.
cuts. Can you view the
Mhm.
world through that? Because you go
What's a
to
curb cut?
most a curb cut. Ah, thank you.
What's a curb
Oh,
cut?
that's a curb cut.
So
So you're walking along the sidewalk,
yeah,
and it's time to step off the curb,
right.
and right. Well, so driveway.
Like a slope.
That's right. A driveway where cars go up
Okay.
the driveway, right? They turn from the
See,
street
see.
into the driveway.
Okay.
That slice, that dip in the curb
Okay.
is a curb cut.
Okay. Okay.
Well, there are more and more curb cuts in the world, and in some
Yeah.
major cities in the United States since the Americans with Disability Act. I mean, there's
Right.
an effort, right? So there's curb cuts, I imagine, even in New York.
Yeah,
And
there are.
yeah,
But
well,
if you can't get into the
not
subway because
there.
there's no elevator,
Right. Absolutely.
curb cut
So,
doesn't matter.
but
Like,
there's a
yeah.
way in which, you know, from a radically individualistic conservative point of view, hey, there's no reason we have to do curb cuts. Curb
Mhm.
cuts are an effort to accommodate a group that tends to be a minority, et cetera,
Mhm.
right? So I was using that in a conversation, that example, in a
Mm.
conversation with a very conservative human being here, and
Mm.
I brought up the the I brought up curb cuts, of
That's
which there
so
are
interesting.
many here.
Yeah.
Every single corner has a curb cut. And as I said curb cuts, he said to me, "Gosh, that's exactly the example I was going to use. I remember when they put those curb cuts in, and
Uh-huh.
I thought to myself, my God, it's so expensive. I've only seen one person ever use those curb cuts. Couldn't we have used that money for something else?" Was his point
Mm.
of view. And it's like, so, and I think about it now. It's like, well, I am absolutely glad and privileging the effort by a society to
Mhm.
accommodate people who, for whatever reason, sometimes their fault, sometimes not their fault, I don't
Mhm.
care, they
Mhm.
can't step off those curbs or get up on top of on the next
Mhm.
curb.
Mhm.
And good that we live in a world that does that. And he
Yeah.
was using them as, my God, what's wrong with the
Wasted
world? There
money.
are so few people.
Did
We
you
could
ask him what
spend
he would
that
have
money
preferred
to,
it?
he would have rather it have come from a conversation that looked at all of the ways that money could be spent and what's going to benefit the most number of people. And
Right.
I understand that
Mm.
perspective. It's not
But
it's
yeah.
not incoherent, but it
Mhm.
wouldn't have addressed the needs of that group that is overlooked so often.
Yeah. And
So
it would be continued to be overlooked by that logic.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, because and there it is, right? There's
Mhm.
that tension that is
Mhm.
there. So um so does does intersectional feminism have anything to do with how you spend your time with the bloom?
Yes.
So tell me,
Yeah. Um, well,
tell everybody what the bloom is.
it started off as a newsletter, as David so eloquently read off. So eloquently read off. I started it while I was working as an unpaid intern in Geneva. It was, it was the most ego satisfying place to ever be in for the people that want to make a difference in the world. The UN is like the ego caresser of it all, the gold star of impact. But it was also the place that I thought, really represented like what it meant to be doing good, and also like doing it at a certain level that gets a certain kind of recognition. Like going to Harvard or Stanford. It was a golden stamp. And I was very happy to be there for the first like 2 months. And I was doing very well, like very, very well. I was the first intern to work with the director of my section. She's like very high up in the human rights world. And I worked directly with her for 2 months on like the International Women's Day campaign. But then I started getting so much work uh, that was not kind of in the contract of, an intern, like, kind of full-time staff work. And I was unpaid again. And so I was quickly burning out. But then there was that piece of the puzzle. But then also there was another, which was that I was seeing so much exploitation of young people. While I was there, by the time I started being burnt out, I really started internalizing like hundreds of narratives, the same narratives over and over again, that every single young person that was there was like, oh, this is the place that I've dreamed of to be for so long since I was a little kid. Like, I'm so happy to be here. And they're all, you know, working for free. Granted, most of them do come from privileged backgrounds, which is also something that is terrible about unpaid internships. That's a total aside.
I actually don't think so. I think it's one of the worst things in the world.
It's, yeah,
People should get paid.
Yes. But no, I mean, like that about 90% of the interns that are able to take an unpaid internship is because they either come from like very wealthy, privileged backgrounds, or they, you know, had some type of money saved up, whatever. But usually it's that they're from very like wealthy homes. But anyway, that aside, there is like, no matter where people come from, I can very confidently say that there was a lot of youth exploitation at the UN, but also just generally at these big legacy nonprofits. And there's this general tendency to like not be receptive to new ideas. And I mean, this is kind of not just the case with young people, but for the most part at these big organizations, it's very, very backwards, very, very traditional, with certain rigid systems in place where the creativity is just and these kinds of institutions don't really go hand in hand. But I was, for the most part, just seeing a lot of like so much exploitation. Like some of my friends were getting work at 10 p.m. with their bosses, telling them please have this done by like 8 a.m. And it was just it was awful. I mean, like seeing friends like slowly become extremely depressed, anxious, but still so happy to be at the UN. I was just so fed up with that, and I actually stopped showing up to the office like for many days, or I would come in late, and I was just very angry, and I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what, so I just didn't go. I just needed some time away. That doesn't look good. So I got called in by my supervisor, who sat me down and said, like, not in a nice way, more like in a threat. Millions of people would kill to be in your place right now. You're completely dispensable. Like, we can easily find someone else. So if you don't do your work, we're gonna fire you. Makes sense. Okay, but I'm working for free, so I mean, and yeah. So I didn't say anything, but I very much wanted to cry, and I did. There's no office though. If you're an intern, you don't actually get an office. And the storage closet was there was a storage closet on our floor, very big. And I didn't understand what you meant by double dipping. So I'm going to let's circle back to what you meant by double dipping with a closet.
You weren't, so you actually cleared that up a moment ago when you said you were not paid. It was an unpaid internship. And I was thinking,
yeah.
Well, if you were on
double dipping.
double dipping.
No.
Got it.
No, but I was just very sad. I was so sad because it was the place, really, like, if my 14-year-old self, 12-year-old self knew that I was there. And I mean, it was like my perfect job. I mean, I had a background in law, and I didn't actually go to law school, but pretty much my whole life was like in preparation for law school. Like, Amal Clooney was like my idol, like I wanted to be in the internet. Like the plan was to get a degree in women's rights and then come back to the United States and go to law school. Like, so I was just in the perfect place. Like, it was everything that I had really hoped. And I was so disappointed. But also recognizing that the main thing that brought me there wasn't just the job, but it was really the prestige. And I was just thinking about how many millions of young people were like me and wanted to, like, would sacrifice anything to be part of this like prestigious institution, and thinking like, if only I had had some type of perspective growing up, like, I didn't have a family that cared if I was happy. They just wanted me to work. Right. So this is the work. They just wanted me to have a prestigious job as a lawyer, make money, and that's it. They didn't really care about purpose. It was just get a good job, do like, be happy, but like, you don't need to have purpose. So for me, like, I didn't really have any, and I didn't have any siblings, and my school didn't really like help much at all. Like, I wasn't well connected outside of my family. My mom's a housewife too, and my dad not present, but her partner is like retired, so I didn't really have anyone I could go to if I wanted to, like, if I just wanted to have a conversation, like, Mom, I want to do something good with my life, I want to do something and I don't know what. For her, the only answer for that was like, go work at the UN. And there's just millions of people that are like young people that grow up with this narrative, because they don't have perspective. They don't have a school that like shows them about, I don't know, a nonprofit in their area that's doing really good things with like climate. And so I didn't have perspective, and that's one of the words that just keeps coming up in my head, and that came up in the closet. Just like perspective, because I think that when you do have perspective, you probably make better decisions, and you also are just have more options, right? When you go into a grocery store, you don't just want to pick between, you don't just want one toothpaste or one potato chip, you want like 50 so that you can pick exactly what you want. No,
There are
the
actually
beauty
times
about
there are times when I feel exactly the opposite. Please don't make me make a choice between all of these cheeses.
I mean, well, all right. All right, David. All
But
right.
I know what you mean.
But yeah, so I didn't know like I was gonna start a company then. Like, I mean, I didn't say I'm gonna start a company about this. What it was that the seed for me was planted. Like, I'm going to do something about this. I don't know specifically in what way it's gonna materialize, but the vision was there. Like, I've always known I wanted to do something like with my life, just have a positive impact in the world, whatever that meant. It doesn't mean at a huge scale necessarily, but I just want to do good, and I want to leave this planet better than I found it. And if I have the privilege and the perspective to do something good, why not follow that? And so that was the seed.
Did the UN, did the people you worked with at the UN know that you were doing this? First of all, did they know that you were spending your time in the broom closet? I mean, in the broom. You could
Yeah,
have called it the broom.
the bloom closet. That would have been good. I'm
Well,
gonna
that's
use
what it
that.
turned out. It was, right? It was the broom
Yeah,
closet, right?
yeah, it was. Except I
So,
actually wasn't working on it in the closet. I was working on it on my laptop, like in the
got it.
office.
And
Yes, they knew.
yes, they knew,
Yeah, they
and
did.
they were happy about it.
Um, yeah, some of them, I told some of them about it and they signed up. It started as the newsletter and it still is the newsletter, also for reference for anyone that doesn't know that's listening. Yeah, I mean, they did know that I was working on it. They were not happy about it. Now they are. Now they message me and they're like, "Oh, like great job. This is so good." And that's really nice to see. But I think that it was just there's just so much unnecessary waste of energy, intellect, creativity that comes into these kinds of spaces that just is the nature of being in those kinds of spaces. And for me, it just didn't work. Like that's just not, no matter how much I wanted to affiliate myself with the institution, at the end of the day, like it's just, I didn't see myself growing there. And I know a lot of other young people feel the same way, where they don't want to sacrifice their personal projects, their creativity in order to be part of it,
And is it a situation sort of being in one of those internships? Do you walk in with it, this is going to be for 6 months, this is going to be for 2 months, this is going to be for whatever, or is it an indefinite, you dive in and maybe a job emerges out of it, or maybe not, or maybe a recommendation for some other entity that because of the people you've met there, they are able to help you get a placement? Or is it something like, you sign yourself over to involuntary servitude or voluntary
Well,
servitude for the rest of your
that's
life?
a very interesting question. I'm gonna give you the honest take because I don't care and I want to be honest and I don't like. So they tell you the first day this internship will not turn into a real job. This unpaid internships at the UN, they tell you even actually in the portal, like if you try to apply to an internship, they're like, this is not a real full-time job, and nor will you get a full-time job from this. And they tell you that in person as well. However, how it actually works on the inside is that you could be an intern for life. I mean, you could just keep bouncing if you're good, right? Like they want you there. They want to keep exploiting you. Which is the gross part about it. Like I saw, 3 or 4 cases in my immediate like community of young people that were just so damn talented. I mean, like people that knew like 7 languages, were so smart, and very like international, and good at talking, about the issues that they're, about very serious topics like counterterrorism and like cybersecurity and these kinds of topics. And they would just bounce between. So I was at OHCHR, which is the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, but that's just one small part of Geneva's like headquarters. You could easily be bouncing around between internships because interns in some cases are themselves part of the recruitment process, and you develop a community of people. You'll hear like, hey, like actually I'm finishing up my internship like in October. I know you're finishing up your internship as well around the same time. Do you want to come take mine? Or it's all like a little mafia. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but it's not bad necessarily, like where if not that it's not bad, it's bad. I feel very weird. Like I don't talk about this publicly. Like this is one of those things where when I talk to the people in my community about this, they're so appreciative of it, but I don't talk about it publicly. Like I don't share posts about it because I'm scared.
Do you want me to make sure that this doesn't get in the podcast?
No, I mean, I don't think they'll listen to it.
Well, it's an interesting piece because it occurs to me that so if the people are doing good work, right, and it's so you've got a place for all these, at least the way you described it, right? There are a bunch of privileged people, financially privileged, we know, right? A bunch of financially set in one way or another people,
but also socially privileged. Maybe they just have very well connected families,
and they're doing good work, and they're not taking the positions of people who need a job that actually produces money. So it's really actually, it might be a great place for those people because they're doing something useful and
except where does their work go? But David, where does their work go?
I don't know. You tell me.
Exactly. Their work goes to people that are not like them. That's the problem. Like what happens, even if I understand what you mean, but their work isn't like in a bubble where it circulates. No. They dictate policy. Like they dictate not just policy, but conversation. Not necessarily, because it's not shaped by people that it's serving. So like if my team is working on, I don't know, gender-based violence research in like Senegal, okay, and there's no one on the team from fucking Senegal that is not even anyone that's actually from Africa, like in the team. They're just people that are French, that speak French. Okay, so they can write French documents for Senegal. That's a problem. So the problem with all this is, sure, like I guess they don't take up jobs of people that like might need it, fine. However, again, like their work does have an impact on the people's lives who are like underprivileged and who are in the countries. Like this research goes to the field. That's how it works. Like headquarters shapes a lot of what happens in the field, and then the field has to answer to headquarters too. And so that's why the problem is it's not a vacuum.
Well, so that's a BS, but that's a different problem than you pointed at. And this, I mean, so interesting. We may have, I love this. We may have come to our we've spoken to each other several times in the past, and this may be the one piece that we've had our first, I don't see eye to eye with you. Because well, so can someone put themselves fully in another person's shoes? No, absolutely not. Right? We are all unique individuals, unique in important ways, et cetera, et cetera. But can we make an effort to see things from another person's perspective? Gosh, I hope so, because if we can't, then we're really in a terrible situation, right? So the effort is, right, so for people to see things from another perspective. The suggestion is that unless somebody is a something, whatever that thing is, they can't come up with an idea, they can't come up with a policy, they can't come up with a program that might genuinely benefit people that they're not a part of, right? That they're not in that group. And I don't believe that. I mean, I've had enough experiences in my own life. I suppose I could be wrong, which does, my experiences don't make me right, but I've had enough experiences in my own life to tell me that I can act in a way towards someone whose life circumstances have been so different from mine.
Right.
In a way, I can act in a way that genuinely benefits them. And they, by their description, thank you for doing this. This is exactly what I needed. I mean, I've had that experience because I was lucky enough and privileged enough to be able to work at a school that was enormously diverse in all sorts of ways, right? In all sorts of, wasn't just different colored ties. There was different backgrounds and different ethnicities and different races and different socioeconomic backgrounds, yada yada yada, different abilities, and both with adults and with young people to have that experience. So I think it would be unfortunate for people to be blind to the fact that, hey, there's nobody from Senegal here. Jesus, we ought to actually wonder, we ought to be curious and then some about whether or not we would feel the same way if we spoke to people who were from the group that we were trying to help. But I wouldn't automatically dismiss what comes out of that as not worthwhile because it was not representative in that way.
Right.
So
I mean, I hear you. I do see your perspective, but I want to ask you a question. I mean, then by your by the logic that you've kind of shared, would you, so you would be okay with then a room full of men, middle-aged men making decisions about abortion in America, policymakers? Do you think that then men should be because if men who, if we put, say, let's in a parallel universe just get a big group of men that are just really empathetic of women's experiences, and they self-identify as feminists, they're very woke, very very okay, and they're the ones literally making legislation about whether or not women
woke,
should.
I would not. If they were woke, I would not trust them. But
okay, good.
Right. No, I would I be okay if that's the only group? Well, I mean,
yeah. Would you be okay with a group of progressive men making the decision as to whether or not women should have right to abortion?
Would I be okay with? Well, if I didn't have a chance to put together the room, then I would have to look at what they came up with. Would I immediately discard it because it was a room of men? No, but would I want there to be a variety of perspectives, including women? Absolutely. And in fact, but I would also want including men, right? I mean, not because
why
men
should a man get the decision about something that doesn't even apply to their case? Why is it that they should even have a say in something that isn't even their right, because it's not their experience? I think where we don't see eye to eye is, for me, good intention is not enough. And I think you also need experience. And I think that in a room full of that, experience should outweigh the people with just good intentions. I do think it's possible to do good, but I also think that experience matters more than good intention.
That is absolutely eye to eye.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
I feel I could easily say I agree with that statement completely. It could have come out of my mouth. The difficulty I would have a difficulty with the men saying, with those men that we just created, with those men rejecting the idea that, hey, we need to open this up to more people that are actually affected by this policy. So one piece, although I am fully supportive of ultimately for women's rights to choose, I don't think decisions about reproduction only affect men. I mean, sorry, only affect women. I think they absolutely affect men, and you know, the most sort of simplistic way, the prospective father, which we assume, we sort of are assuming that person has no interest in that potential human being, but I'm not sure that's always true. But so I wouldn't exclude men from making from participating in policy decisions like that, but I wouldn't immediately assume that what they produce is crap to be discarded, and because they may, you know, sometimes. Look, I'm a strong believer in participatory democracy, but sometimes the king or the queen does a nice thing, and that's good for people. Not frequently, frequently not enough, but that's my, you know, to me that's the virus, no pun intended, infecting the conversations about identity groups, is that individuals are complex things. I cannot point to a rich white man and assume that that person doesn't understand stuff, because, you know, I mean, I know from my perspective, right? So I'm not rich. I'm white, but I've been in enough rooms where I've been called a dirty Jew or worse because I'm Jewish. And by the way, I'm dyslexic, which really made law school very difficult and graduate school very difficult. I didn't know that. But and so somebody looking at me,
they wouldn't know.
Oddly enough, the anti-Semites know immediately, and I don't understand how. But I've had, you know, lots of people just exactly. I mean, I really do think that, which is one of those questions I want to get to with you. But I do think there's a, you know, there's a magical element in life that is mysterious, and like, how do those people know? They do.
That's very true.
And they do.
I think just being able to make space for multiple, again, making space at the table for, if you have the privilege to decide who comes to the table, make space like for the people who, you know, supposedly are going to be the ones affected by your, like, you wouldn't want, don't, like, if you know, you've headed and been a part of shaping so many school like policies, like, did you ever in your time there, like, ask young people, like, or the kids, what do you want? Or like,
constantly.
what, right? Okay, so
absolutely.
Why wouldn't, right? That's like, well, if you consider a school, society a school, you would want to be asking the people who you serve, like, what could be, and you'd want to bring them to the table too. You know, I think that the people who live certain experiences know their story best, and so they would probably know how to serve their communities best. But just because you are a, you know, Black middle class woman doesn't mean that you actually empathize necessarily with other, you know, Black folks, and like that may be like extremely disadvantaged. Like, you don't.
I can tell
right?
You that's
like,
absolutely true.
Just because I am a woman doesn't mean the majority of people that voted for Trump, like, were, you know, in the white, like, groups were white women. So, you know, this is why the intersectional part comes in, because, you know, if I just say I'm a feminist, that's not what I am, because unfortunately feminism is also very co-opted by like white feminist movements, and it tends to be not intersectional.
Yeah. No, I get it. I do get it. I'm watching myself. It's like, why do I'm asking myself this question, but not on tape. But why do I? Because I would never just like, oh, you just interviewed Jasmine, just had a conversation with Jasmine Anouna. Who is she? I would never describe you as an intersectional feminist, because it's so small compared to how
would you
I
describe
see you. How would I describe you? Oh, she
Give me
is,
my bio. Let me
oh,
take notes.
she's one of the most awake, she's one of the most awake young women I've ever met. I would describe you as a woman, not knowing anything. Well, I mean, I'm assuming I know something about I know who you live with, so I know something about you. But she's the most awake young woman. She's a combination of Italian and Egyptian, and she's got a varied background and an interest in international policy and women's rights and the rights of people. It's like it's so small
Mm,
compared
okay.
to the unique full individuality that I've experienced. That and I you know I certainly understand the
Mm,
the the need, the importance of including those identity groups in a conversation, because I think they're important. But they really don't tell me, so many things that are spectacular and perhaps terrible about another human being, right?
mm,
And so I don't want to lose that. I don't want to
right, right,
lose the individual to the group, and I certainly don't want to exclude the group and
right,
and
right.
pretend that culture has no culture, gender, ability, ethnicity has no effect on who this person is. But I want to get back to the pieces like, so, okay, so the the Bloom started as a newsletter and grew out of a closet. and 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 what is it growing towards? What do you want it to be? Not recognizing
Yeah.
that you could change your mind a billion times by tomorrow, but
No,
what do you want it to be?
not exactly what I said in the bio. I want it to be a part of anyone's life, that anyone that wants to do good in the world. And I want it to be there for them to find perspective and opportunities to grow, whether that's educational opportunities, career opportunities, information, entertainment. I think that unfortunately right now, the biggest question, if you want to do good in the world, where the hell do you go? Where do you go? Where do you start? Do you know where to go? You probably go to like a Facebook group. Maybe you go to a person who you look up to. What if you don't have that? What if you don't know where to start with Facebook groups? It's kind of an endless cycle of exhausting, trying to find very niche things. I think it's very like there are so many amazing groups. There are incredible communities online. There's amazing platforms. There's amazing resources. But the difficulty is in actually like understanding what's trustworthy. Where do you like how do you actually start the journey if you're a young person like and you're online, you're going to get sucked into so many different things. So I think the idea is like removing the energy that it takes and just making it easier to be a good person and easier to have multiple perspectives into your life. I don't think that it should be hard, and I want to make it easier for people, and I want that to be easy anywhere you are in the world. So if you're like a young person in Ghana, if you're a young person in India, if you're a young person in the United States, it should be fucking easy for you to make a difference in your community. And you shouldn't have to come from a wealthy family. You shouldn't have to be well connected. You don't, it doesn't matter where you go to school. There should be some type of institution, some type of platform outside of all of these things that you were given, because it's just, these are things that you didn't choose. You probably don't choose your family, probably don't choose your school, you know, you don't choose this stuff, but you can choose certain things, right? Like what you digest on your phone, probably, like, and what you digest on your laptop. And so that's where the bloom comes in. And I would imagine, and my dream is for this to become a part of like just anyone that wants to do good in the world and the part of their life, like where they know that they're supported, and they have perspective. So right now, it's a
Is
newsletter, but I would imagine it to be a platform. So where people can actually exchange, where they can find communities in their own area, where they can find jobs in their own area, where they can find other people in their area to collaborate with. So if I'm, again, the young person from Ghana or the young person from India, I can easily find the communities in India or Ghana that are next to me without having to go through 30 hurdles just to find like, what are some cool like communities to be a part of here, and where I don't have to expend so much energy, you know? Yeah.
I have two questions,
Uh,
two
yes.
questions there. So one, they're probably both difficult, but maybe not. Maybe one is even surprisingly difficult. So how does that become a business, or does it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and how does this is in, how do you see it going from uh, a newsletter, which it currently is,
Mhm.
to this thing called a platform? What's the difference, and
Right.
how do you get from what it is to what it wants to be?
Well, in many ways, it already is becoming what it wants to be. And I'm not saying that because it's wishful thinking. I'm saying that because I observe, I'm in touch with like hundreds of young people that are part of my community. I actually get on the phone with many of the people that I know them by first name basis, you know? So I'm trying as best as I can. This is obviously not a sustainable model. To get to know the people and what they want and what their dreams are and what brings them there. But so how do you go from it? Well, it's going to stay a newsletter. I think newsletter to me like feels like still it's so cool. Like I still, again, I'm a quite a shy person online, so I don't really have a huge presence on social media, like, and I don't really foresee myself like taking all the content from the Bloom and like putting it on a social media platform. I really like the format of a newsletter as well because it's an email and it still feels like writing a letter, and I'm old school and I like letters, but it's just like a digital letter. And it still feels like I'm writing a personal thing to a friend, you know, like, and I think the reason why people love it so much is because they can feel that it's coming from like a genuine place of just like wanting to parse through all the bullshit and just bring out the most meaningful stuff. It's going to stay a newsletter. I think that, so the way that we are growing, and it is a business, by the way, it's already a sustainable like business. I mean, I've been developing it into a business. We are like generating profit actually in the last like 2 months. It's been really fun. It's been very satisfying. And, you know, it's been, in some very honest way, it's been easy to make it profitable because it is filling a need. It's filling a void. And
Does
that's what
the
I've always,
revenue, sorry,
sorry. No,
no,
go
does
ahead.
the revenue come from advertising?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't even call it like advertising. I mean, yes, the traditional way is advertising, like buy this product. But actually, so, I mean, right now, because it's small and this is like the luxury of still being early stage, is that I can actually, you know, pick and identify and also like have relationships with the people that who I am advertising for. So I'm not advertising for like just anyone. It's like I'm, you know, actively choosing
Curated.
in a very like, yeah, it's highly
Yeah.
curated and it's more like uplifting storytelling, like and I'm calling it story allies. I mean, the way that we generate profit is we have a lot of great examples. So in the United States, there's a lot of really, I mean, some of the most successful newsletter businesses have come from the United States. Like, I don't know if you know Morning Brew or The Hustle or Axios actually. So Axios is a, you know,
Sure.
do you know them? Yeah, they started
Yeah.
with newsletters and their whole business model is newsletters. And Morning Brew, I just read this the other day. Morning Brew
Didn't
sold
know
for
that.
like $70 million, which is insane. So these newsletters are, I mean, they are a very profitable business if you tap into a very small niche, which in many ways, like the Bloom involuntary, like I didn't really realize it when I was starting early on that it was going to be a very small niche. And then when a few months in, you know, when people ask me who's your audience, I was like, I don't know, people that I just love it. Now I know exactly who I'm talking to,
Who is that?
which has made it
Is
people
it
that
for
want to
men?
do good. No, well, it's for anyone that wants to do good in the world. And I think that the people that are open-minded don't care if the content is about, like, you know, if it's about a lot of a lot of it is about women or women identifying people, and it's not
Yeah.
just about women at this point, it's really anyone. Like, so one of the articles that I have this week and one of the resources is about indigenous technologies, and it's a guide to looking at indigenous knowledge across multiple regions of the world and the technologies that they've used in order to fight climate change. And so this is not necessarily a gendered topic, it's just an intersectional approach.
Sure.
I've actually initially when I did start, I mean, there's been many iterations of the Bloom, and initially when I did start, it was very women centric, and I've moved away from that, honestly, I would say completely. I do highlight a lot of stories, like not necessarily about women, because just because a story is about women does not mean that it's intersectional or progressive, but just where multiple intersections are there. And the editorial lens is very unique. and that there really is nothing like it right now. And because of that, I think we've just been able to grow very organically. So as far as our model grows too, I mean, like from a personal perspective, like I think the biggest and the best like move that I ever did, which was actually encouraged also by Stefan, which was just do one thing and do it very well and get very good at it. So I just focused on the newsletter. I don't have any social media for the Bloom. I have accounts for it, but there's nothing there. Initially, I felt very guilty about that. And I think like my experience with like entrepreneurship is that at the beginning in the first year, I wanted to do everything and I wanted to do it fast. And I mean, I was having conversations last year with investors like in Silicon Valley, and I don't, looking back at it, I'm like, I'm embarrassed. But if you're not embarrassed by where you came from, then you're not growing. And I clearly did. I wouldn't be having conversations with these same people right now. But I just thought that was like the thing to do, build up the hype and everything. But I don't care. You know, I'm focusing just on my community right now. The rest will follow. Like, you know, because if you just focus on doing that one thing and doing it very well and listening, I think that's been like, and one of the reasons why I really love our—
Are you the sole editor? Do
I'm
you
the
do?
sole editor right now. Yeah, but I've been, so one of the things that I've recognized and that has been very important to me is putting on paper my editorial like lens. But I do work pretty closely with one of my collaborators in South Africa, KK. She's amazing, and she does a lot of like, she does help me find a lot of the content, and I do like, we have a lot of exchanges. At a certain point, I was managing about 9 volunteers, and they were women all over the world, and this was from last year, from October until January of this year. But I stopped because I felt very strange about it because it was unpaid as well. But it was more just like people that were very passionate about the Bloom's mission and asked me if they could just collaborate. And it wasn't like necessarily like work, but I let them say it was you know, full-time or something because they were looking for jobs. And it's helped a lot of them. In fact, one of the women that I worked with like before, she now has a job full-time at UNESCO. So, and I know that she talked a lot about the Bloom like in her application as well. So I mean, it did some good along the way, but I've stopped taking on any while I'm focusing on, you know, just the newsletter. But I am building out the finances and like bootstrapping right now with the intention of being able to hire some contractor like work, just, you know, part-time folks to work with me. And I am also looking for a co-founder as well, actually, who may potentially just, you know, I think it would be a lot funner to go through this with someone.
What does that mean? Well, just from the point of view of the industry, you're looking for a co-founder means you're looking for backers, right? A backer financially? What do you mean?
No. Co-founder means so I'm the founder, sole founder right now. I would be looking to potentially split the company in, not split it in half necessarily, but where someone that has the same, you know, cultural values, by me like entrepreneurial culture values, and that's passionate about like the Bloom's mission and that would want to work on this full time with me. That's what I mean. No, not the financial backers, but I am looking for those too. Yeah.
Well, so I'll make sure I put a link up to how people can get in touch and see it, just to see it
on the website. The website is the best place.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. I'll make sure it's
okay.
there.
Okay.
So
thank you. But yeah, I mean, the vision is really for it to be global, and I know that there is a global demand for it. I think that one of the things that I not necessarily like having difficulty with, but like how do you communicate that this is something that really is gaining a lot of traction? Like for me, a lot of like, I don't have a background in like data, I don't have a background in entrepreneurship or business, so like collecting the right data and like highlighting that has been quite a challenge. That's what I'm like trying to figure out right now, is like, what can I show? Because I have like, not at this point, about 1,000 emails in total from the last year, of people reaching out to me because of the Bloom, like just talking about how much it's impacted their life. And how do I take that? Thank you. It's wonderful, but it's also I don't know how to convey that into a pitch. How do you summarize that in like 10 slides on a pitch deck? You know, these are people's stories, and like it's also like there's a lot of good happening, but
but it's an organic growth, right? I mean, this is without putting any, this is without putting any sort of formulaic standard
No,
formulaic
I think
pitch
that's been
behind it.
like,
So
it's so funny. I hear often on these podcasts with like entrepreneurs, like, show them that you're scrappy. And I'm like, like, I'm literally scrappy because I didn't know how the hell to advertise. Like, they're like, show no, like, I'm literally a scrappy, but like, I don't know how to do like, some of the stuff today. So I had no choice, like, to be
one of those things that's really, that I think is sort of, at the very least, it's ironic, and it might just be pointing at something more, is that the people who describe themselves as entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs,
Mm,
it's almost by
serial killers.
definition that it's almost by definition that it's not entrepreneurial, right? It's
Yeah.
like entrepreneurs are people who do things that have, right? They start things that haven't been done before. The idea that
Mhm,
you can teach entrepreneurial studies. It's like, wait,
mhm,
really?
mhm.
So
Do you
it's an
know,
interesting
David?
phenomenon.
And I think that what you're tapping at is also something I did want to go back to it, because I very much appreciate it. Like, I don't know, I don't ever like to affiliate myself with like a particular like word necessarily. I don't know. Like, in that way, like, my awakeness is also just like, I'm just very open to anything, to like the world, and to like, I think I'm a very like malleable, like, not in the sense of like volatile, but just malleable person, and I think that's just because I'm relatively good listener, and because of that, it's very strange to put myself in a box. So and the entrepreneurship box, or in the intersectional feminist box. So these are things that I do grapple with, like, on a not daily, but I'm just a curious human who loves to listen, and who listens well, and who wants to do something with what I hear and what I observe. But how do you convey that? People need like a bio. You need a bio, like you.
Yes, but you just did, and I don't for a moment. I'm not for a
Mhm,
moment suggesting that you uh, that identifying oneself with a group is a bad thing.
mhm,
Um, but it the emphasis on that, I don't mean your emphasis, I mean the emphasis in that in the world, to the
mhm,
exclusion of recognizing and valuing and valorizing each human being's individual peculiarities and powers and quirks and all of those other things,
mhm,
it carries a danger with it, right?
mhm.
It's because then we all get to start thinking of ourselves as with this group, not with that group. That group is
Right,
first contact with other groups has never gone well. so
right, right.
so
I
it's
mean, you.
so it's it's maybe it's one of those just sort of stereotypical pendulum things where it swings in one direction and then it goes a little too far and you want it to swing back in the other direction, and
Mhm,
that we should not forget that we don't forget it in our lived lives,
mhm.
right? We don't we don't mate with people because they're part of a particular group. We mate with them because, yes, their group
Oh,
identity is part of who they are, but we're drawn to people for their unique, important individual nature. And it's not like they're the
I
necessarily
don't know,
the only
David.
one.
I don't know about that. I think I don't know how many young men you've spoken to, but I don't know. It's that I I don't think they're. I don't think that's what. I don't think that's what you see for the most part on like dating profiles. I'm drawn to unique, like I mean, I'm totally the same way, but
Yeah, but chemistry doesn't happen between groups. Chemistry happens between individuals. So
right, that's true. But I was gonna say, like, I mean, hearing you speak, and everything you've just said made me think that like one of the most memorable classes I was in university, that like I just wish every single conversation could be like this, and I feel like ours are usually, where we all sit down. I mean, it was a small class, it was like 10 people, and this was an education class, and he was very good, very very good, and he had a background in critical race theory, um but anyway, but so he would sit us down in a circle, and he would just like make us go around before we even started talking about all the readings and talking about the work and everything, just like check in, just like, hey guys, like you're gonna probably be talking to each other because I'm gonna be asking you all these questions about what you all read, and you're probably gonna be feeding. But before we do that, like let's just look at each other as like people. And let's just ask each other, how are we doing, and let's like reflect and let's take a moment. Some of us might be going through a lot right now. You know, one of you might be very sad about something. You don't need to talk about it, but like just be aware, like maybe that person's going to say something offensive because they're just really like hurting or something, and whatever. Anyway, but I think that these kinds of like dynamics, how we, the barriers, I think that the barriers can be, with a good facilitator, a good facilitator knows that there are inevitably, we come with so many, but the way that you structure a room, the way that you, whether you choose to have a table between two people or not, makes a huge difference. Marina Abramovich, like the performance artist, do you know her?
Yes.
She had a very famous like exhibition performance art in the MoMA, I think it was. And initially she would, the artist is present, right? Like that was her most famous one of her most famous like performances, and she would just sit for I don't know how many hours, but initially, and she would stare at, you know, people could come from the audience and just, or audience from the spectators could come and sit, and she would just stare and just sit, and it was very emotionally charged. But initially, which a lot of people don't know, is that she had a table between the herself and the person, and she actually got rid of the table eventually because she realized that it was a huge barrier between it, like it interrupted the energy flow. So I think that like one of the things that I appreciate so much about you, but also is that in the same language that we speak, is that I think we understand like energy flows very well. And I think that when you are coming from like an education background, you understand that the way that you shape a room, and that the way that you you know, that facilitators are being aware of how things influence energy is really important. But also just that they can be barriers to recognizing the humanity in other people.
Mhm.
And anyway, I forgot why I'm mentioning that. So I think it's related to what you were talking about, I hope. But yeah, pretty sure it's
So
related.
let me ask you, is there anything else you want to speak about? You want to make sure we speak
Um,
about? Assuming anyone will ever hear this or see this, which I'm
I
committed to
think
making happen.
what's interesting is like, for me, what I show versus what I don't show. Like, I think it would be interesting. Also, like maybe hearing about it in your own life and like what you've seen and what you haven't. Like, I mean, so much of like what I don't talk about was really influential in shaping like the path that I didn't go down, but I almost did, have been just as influential in shaping the path that I did go down, right? Like we talk about often the paths that we choose without like talking about the ones that we didn't. And for me, like I almost had a whole other like life, and I almost ended up like working at Goldman Sachs, and that was like straight out of college, which was the you know, the good worker in me that wanted like validation, like in this kind of way where I was looking for the financial validation of like being, what successful for me meant like working in a gold star and earning a lot of money. And I did accept like a full-time job at Goldman Sachs in Salt Lake City, Utah, straight out of college. And I had a contract with them and everything. I got the t-shirt and I was so proud.
You got
And
the
then I
T-shirt.
started realizing, oh yeah, I still have it. And like, this is a huge part of my story. And I don't know like whether like how to talk about it, where to talk about it. But I know that it's something I do want to, because
What
it,
what what
it's
what changed your mind? Because
because
I
was
take
honest.
it you didn't make it to Salt Lake City.
I actually did. I went to Salt Lake City. Well, that was for the interview. I
Oh,
actually had the flu, and I'm pretty sure I gave every single person the flu. Like very bad. I'd never had the flu in my life, and I met with like 8 people, 8 interviewers, and I'm pretty sure they all got sick.
well, perhaps
Um,
it's a good place to do that.
yeah, yeah. Um, Not COVID though, but
Uh,
yeah, just the flu.
but why'd you
Um,
change your mind?
I think it was because, for a few things. The first was, I had, for the most part, most people were telling me like, this is great, like take it, you know, all the people around me. But then I had like one or two good friends that were like, what the fuck are you doing? Why, you know? And I think it was having them, but then also like just making time for stillness. We've talked about like the value of meditation. I wasn't meditating back then, really. But what I did do was that I just like tried to make room for silence. I would go for a lot of walks in like the woods. We had a very nice like campus in college, and I would just spend a lot of time like in nature. And I think that I had like about a month to decide whether or not to do that, or spend a lot of money to go to my, you know, fancy masters in like women's rights. So I was deciding between the two. I did choose the Goldman Sachs one, but I think the last minute I ended up calling them and saying like, no, sorry. But it was really tough. Like, I think I'm just being honest with myself about what my real motives were. And to be honest, it was really just the ego boost of making a lot of money straight out of college. And I think, and also because I didn't know that I could probably, like, if I'd had some perspective too, knowing that there are actually a lot of companies that are very great, like mission driven companies that pay you probably just as much very well. Like, you know, you don't have to work for these big, well, I don't really know how to describe it, but just awful places. You don't have
Where did you go? Where did you go as an undergraduate? And what did you
um
study?
Swarth, I went to Swarthmore College, which is a small liberal arts college
Oh
outside
yes,
of
I know
Philadelphia.
Swarthmore. Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know, no, I was not among the people that went to class barefoot or in my pajamas. However, no. However, we did drink a lot of wine, like in the middle of the day in class, and had lots of discussions about Nietzsche and drunk and anyway, it was very fun. But yeah, I went and I studied political science, which again, like if you're in that career path, that's like school encourages you. The college definitely had a lot more info sessions. Let's just put it this way, for like management consulting, investment banking. The career office is basically just, I don't know if they have like, if they get a ton of money from like Goldman Sachs and like BCG, but my theory is that they do. And a lot of colleges, and the more young people I speak to, the more does seem to be like, especially in the United States, very overwhelming phenomenon of career services centers just being places of recruiting for big consulting and investment banking, which is what happened. And I was like a prime candidate for that. And they don't do the same for impact, right? So there's like a huge other, anyway, that's also related to the Bloom. Like if you don't have perspective, like then you go to these kinds of places. So yeah, so I studied political science, Latin American studies, and Spanish. My background was predominantly in Latin American politics, something that I loved because it gave me a lot of perspective on US history.
Sure.
Studying, when you have a good teacher, studying Latin American studies is basically just like understanding the real United States, you know? Yeah.
So I have one more question that I want to make sure I get to. So, and
Are we done? No, are we done?
well, we could be done soon if you'd like, but I have
Oh,
this one
no,
question,
it's okay. Oh
which
no, no,
is,
I was asking
oh,
in a
ah,
I didn't want it to be
got it,
done. No,
got it.
no, no.
Where do you think your values come from? Because none of the particular experiences grab it. So where do those values come? Like, and how do you prioritize them? Like, how do you, like, what's the most important things to do? So where do those things, where do you think for you and maybe for the world, where do they come from? Are you a person who, do you have particular identifiable religious roots? Do you have, yeah, I don't want to load the dice here. So, because, you know, you're obviously you care about the nature of the life you lead, and you know, the foreseeable consequences of your actions, right? And but that doesn't, you know, that you're not necessarily born with that, and so, or maybe you are, but where are those from? Where do you imagine those are from?
Very dark place.
Dark place.
Yeah. I
You don't have to
mean,
talk about it, but you can.
thankfully, no, I don't think any of my family will listen to this. I
You'd
just
be
like,
surprised.
I grew up around such bullshit. I really I grew up with terrible values. Like, I mean, as far as, family goes, my household, I learned how to be a good person because I grew up around a lot of bad people. I witnessed a lot of just like abuse. I witnessed a lot of arrogance. I witnessed a lot of violence. I witnessed a lot. And I was a very difficult household to grow up in. Because of that, I actually spent a lot of time outside of my home. I would go for very long walks in nature. I had the privilege of growing up in the countryside in Tuscany. So I would spend a lot of time like in the hills, like by myself. This is not easy to talk about, but yeah, sorry.
You don't need to.
Yeah, I just spent a lot of time alone. And I guess like it was just a lot of depression from very young. And so I spent a lot of time outside of my physical household. And I spent a lot of time alone just observing nature. And I think that a lot of my grounding values do come from just observing nature. And just I think that my two main ones are just like curiosity, and I'm not a religious person, but I am very spiritual. I just recognize that I don't matter. Like, we don't matter. None of us really matters. The only thing that matters is the way we make other people feel, our presence in the moment, and just leaving behind a legacy of love, I think, is always something that I've like thought, and that love is really the only thing that matters, not just like intimate, but not like romantic, but just love, like building relationships that are genuine. And I think I seek that in my everyday life now, because I never had that growing up for the first like 18 years of my life. Like, yeah.
I don't want to be I don't know how to fill in that last piece of that phrase, but I think what you're saying is actually that we do matter, right? That those things matter so much to our families, whether they, right, to the people we are close to our communities. So it's, yeah, it's,
we're so important, but we're also not important in the way that I think oftentimes, if it's like the entitled, like the I think we matter in relationship to other people, but as individuals, I mean, the best thing you can possibly do is to be present and to love wholly, and to God, I don't know, I wanted to say something important, but just
to tell the truth.
To live an authentic life that's truest to yourself. Yeah. And to just keep growing and to keep learning, I think, as well. And just like that openness does create, and it make it more likely that you will keep evolving and growing. And we're, all little plants, and we change and we grow. And ideally you'd want to keep nurturing it, and think of yourself as in that way, like malleable, where you're not static. And I think that when we get so stuck in like one identity, too, going back to like our original conversation, that is the danger, right? Is when and I think that that's something that we didn't really necessarily touch on, but like when you do affiliate too deeply with certain identities, like whether that is like as an identity as a writer, as an identity as like a feminist, as an identity as a journalist, as an identity, I mean, you lose the potential for continuing to grow and evolve and question and change. I mean, there's some that are obviously never change, right? Some identities might never change for you, but they could, and you don't know that. I'm a woman now, but maybe I will be a man. You don't know. So I just think it's being open to the world, and being curious about yourself, but being curious about other people. And yeah, but I think that curiosity is definitely like one of those things that is just so beautiful. And I think that when you find other people that are curious, that's like one of the most special feelings in the world. People that ask good questions, people that are present, and that's why it's very rare. But there's a lot of them, but it's I don't know, it's rare, but it's also not.
I think I know what you mean by that.
You know what I mean?
I think it's both. Well, it seems, well, here's how I see that. I think everybody's hungry for it. Virtually
Right.
everybody is hungry
Yeah.
for that. But
Hmm.
that's so much of how lives are shaped and the cultures we come from, the various cultures. There are fewer opportunities that invite that, right? And there are opportunity.
Hmm.
The world is set up not to invite uh, that sort of relationships, those sorts of relationships, but in fact, you know, the opposite in so many cases, where you have to be professional. In
Hmm.
addition to, well, professional is that thing that we say when when a person is acting like a human being. Right? No, you need to be more professional about this, and it has
Hmm.
its value, because
Hmm.
sometimes you need to set aside your personal stuff to do what is more important in front of that needs to be done right now. But
Hmm.
it's both rare but I don't think it's rare in a human being. I think human beings hunger for that,
Hmm.
for those
That's true.
connections.
We could have a whole other podcast about professionalism. I do, because that in itself, like, I don't know. I mean,
I
I
call it the
think
P word.
the woman that won the Olympics in her bright orange hair and long nails, I think they were green. Um, the runner. People told her she was professional, but I mean, she still beat everyone. I mean, I think that is one of those things that, again, like, it doesn't, that term in itself too, like, being curious about the term professional, like, it's, I don't I don't necessarily think it has its time and place in some ways. Like, I think that it's good. I mean, the important thing is being able to understand where someone's coming from, right? And I think professionalism is a very, like, I know I'm dwelling on one small thing of what you said, but I feel like it's a very interesting conversation, and I have a bit more like open idea of like what it means to be professional, and also just like I don't think that we need that anymore. Like, I could have come to this interview with like a bright yellow blazer, and you still would have hopefully taken me and like, I don't know. I don't know what. But
Yes.
it doesn't, like, I don't,
Yes.
as long
Yeah.
as you can are able to build a bridge of communication between two people, I think it doesn't really matter like what someone, and because professionalism, I think, is usually associated with the aesthetic, at least with what the concept
Well, I
and
also think
how the
it's,
concept is used.
you mean some of it is about being aware of how we speak to each other. And I don't mean just verbally. I mean, the, uh, if you show up in a particular way, looking in a particular way, some people will warm to it. Some people
Hmm.
will trust you. Some people
Hmm.
will reject it. So and
Hmm.
so it's about it's it's about picking your audience. I remember when I was when I
Hmm.
was in law school and I was interviewing for a summer internship, paid a summer job actually. Um, um, excuse me. Uh, well, so it's in the law school. The interviews happen in the law school, and and I didn't particularly want to be working in these jobs. So um, everybody shows up in a three-piece suit, right? So here you are in law school, and you're in jeans and a t-shirt or whatever it is you're wearing, and then you go to one of these interviews there in the law school where you always show up, and everybody's got a three-piece suit on, and
Mm.
I was that sort of person. so so I did not wear a three-piece suit, and
You see?
instead, I knew that this three-piece suit spoke a language, but it
Mhm.
meant something. And I walked
Right.
into the first one of those interviews, and
Mhm.
the young lawyer who was interviewing looked at me and said, most people show up in a three-piece suit. And I reached into my pocket and pulled out my Polaroid and said, "Oh, I can wear a suit." And I held him the picture of this suit, but it just didn't seem like it would be necessary. But in case you need to know, I can do that. and will do that if I get the job. And and I actually got the job offer. I didn't take the job, but but
Oh,
but
that's awesome.
but uh, I think it's good to know your audience and good to think about the kind of thing you want to communicate, and ultimately
Right.
know that, you know, it's it's certainly superficial, and sometimes superficial things matter and sometimes they don't at all, and ultimately
Hmm.
they probably don't, but you know,
Hmm.
for you to
But
get,
who did?
sometimes to get in the door you gotta whatever. I have a
That's
friend
true.
who ran for Congress
Mm.
and won, and was actually on the short list for vice president, but she didn't make it. Um, and she came to me when she was running for her first office. She was wonderful. She's a wonderful person. And she said, just look, I feel like I've got to tell you this, but um, you're going to read some things like, you know, that I've joined a church, and it was like, and just know that I'm doing that because if I don't belong to a church, I won't ever get elected in. And I feel like it's
Mm.
important for me to get, and so I, you know, I get it. I get it.
Right. Right.
So
That's true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, just knowing your audience. And I mean, for me,
yeah,
like, it's definitely affiliating with, like, feminism, and but also just like describing myself as an intersectional feminist. Like, it's
yeah,
important so that in like quicker, I don't have time to get to know, the thousands of people in the community, but if they
no,
see certain words, they can make certain assumptions, right? Which like aren't necessarily false, but there's more to a person than
yes,
just like the descriptive things they use. But it's just words are, again, like in the clothes, words are a tool to be able to communicate a message,
right.
and in some cases, yes, it's reductive, but it also it can be very powerful political tool, which is why wearing a certain like piece of clothing or choosing to look in a certain way is a political statement, and
I
it's like
think,
a quick thing. And
I think I think the only barrier to those things, or the only thing to consider, is that
Mhm,
you don't, one doesn't want to, it seems to me, I don't want to, but I don't want to adopt what might be a very effective um, tool
mhm,
if that tool feels wrong, false, or dangerous. And so, um, so, but if it's not those things,
mhm.
then fine, whatever.
What
If,
tool are you?
whatever it is, whatever, like, you know,
Whatever
if
it
you're a
is.
person
Okay.
who's opposed to trying to think of what one, like, if you think that identifying yourself as a member of a group
Hmm.
um, is not accurate, is not true,
Hmm.
right? And that there's danger in that, or no, that it's a wrong thing to do,
Hmm.
then even if it's effective, it might not be the right thing to do.
I was gonna ask you where I don't think I've asked you this, but where do your values come from?
Um, you know, I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe that's why I asked it. But
Mm.
you know, I've been, hell, I can tell you that I've been paying a lot of attention recently to conversations um, between people who are theologists, or sort of God or religion based values, people who to attribute things to that,
Hmm.
and people who are, for lack of a better term, sort of religiously atheist, and and you know, I'm definitely not a person who um, believes that there's a God or something like that. Um, but I don't see it as impossible. and in fact, they're, you know, how we think about religion, you know, it might be important to have those powerful, sort of perpetually true religious stories as a guidepost for to grapple with the questions that I think spirituality and religion and ancient philosophies ask, which is, you know, what's the nature of reality, and how are we supposed to be? How should we be in this world, right? And I think it's really important for a person to grapple with those things. And I'm always impressed with people who grapple rather than who adopt a particular stance, because what, you know, people who accept, deeply believe, stridently believe, perhaps fundamentally believe either a particular religious tradition or doctrine or book, or the opposite, the absence of it. You know, the people who are absolutely certain that all that stuff is worthless is bizarre. It's
very
almost
bizarre.
like it's a religious, it's a fundamentalist belief in something else that that ultimately feels unknowable. So, you know, I learned at some point relatively recently that the word Israel, one of the words, one of the meanings of the words Israel is something like he who wrestles with God. And by God, to me, it's a conversation about ultimate reality. Like what's the nature of existence? Right?
Yeah.
And
religious texts and traditions have been one of, I mean, for so many centuries, were the main way of making sense of the world. We're the way of making sense of seasons, changing seasons, you know, explaining why it's raining today, why it's not sunny. It was just a way of making sense of the world. Exactly. It's meaning making. But and to deny that and to reject all of that would be to reject where you've probably come, like where we've come from, and to reject that is just ignorant, you know. It's, I mean, it's, and that's scary. I think that rejection is in some way a way of preserving a bubble, and that in doing that you are, I mean, you're just epitomizing what it means to be not a curious person. I mean, like the opposite of curiosity is just, you know, I think it's just ignorance, like comes from not being curious. And no matter what, like, I don't know, it doesn't really matter how nice someone is, if they reject and don't express like an interest in learning, I think it's scary. Because that creates a lot of barriers. And also that just, it also isn't honoring like where we've come from and like our ancestry and our history and like, it's, how can you not be, you know? Also religion is fascinating. But it's also, it was a way of making sense of the world. And I think it's just very interesting to, you know, dwelling too much in it, like, you know, I mean, coming from Italy where people are obsessed with history, I mean, then there's a whole, that's also very problematic. But I think actually to your question about like values, I did read a lot when I was little, and one of the first and more influential texts in my life was Siddhartha, by Hermanus, and there was a passage about a stone, and that was like a story that helped me understand. It was my first introduction to Buddhism, was like a story about a stone, that I literally copied on a notebook. Because I thought it was so fascinating. But I think a lot of like of the Buddhism that as I understand it now, like came from this one particular story, which is fascinating. But yeah, stories that have come, like that are in certain religions, I mean, they are a way of like understanding and how to be as a good person. Like our moral like systems have been based off of religion. I mean, religion is a moral structure as well. Yeah.
Well,
So
and it's not clear. It's not clear, you know. I mean, Nietzsche may have been right, but without gods, anything goes. You know, some people clearly don't believe that, right? Some people think we can, that that ethics can derive from a purely rational approach to the world that is
Mhm.
rooted in that doesn't need the the spiritual mythology. And
Mhm.
maybe that's true, but maybe it's
Mhm.
not. And
I call
and
bullshit.
it's the you know I mean, we update software all the time, right? So
Mhm.
so these ancient stories, you know, they seem to endure, and maybe they needed, maybe they need an updated interpretation to make it make sense in our world. But the idea of excluding them because they're sort of primitive and backward, and and how could the world have been made in 7 days and 6 days? And we know that's not him. We know
Right.
from science and from geological records that it's far older than the Bible would tell us. And is well, but that may not be what the stories were about. So
No. And
so
that speaks to this idea of like rejection versus like curiosity, which I've been in rooms where some of the students that I was around like refused to read certain texts because the philosophers that I was in a lot of political theory classes, and a lot of the political theorists that modern political theorists that people do read were slave owners. And I've been in rooms where people refused to read I mean books that were extremely influential in like political theory because of who the people were, rather than just like having an open mind and just like reading it just for the sake of like knowing like where certain things come from. I mean, it's the same as like I actually read Mein Kampf when I was a teenager because I was just curious, like this book that influenced so much awful history. To reject it doesn't actually, that's the irony, right, of like rejection. It doesn't mean that you're going to get like that it's gone. Like if you reject something, it doesn't mean that it's not going to still exist. And I think that's like that's the ego, is like, it's if you reject it, well then it will go away. But no, actually it's a very selfish, like, and very self-centered mindset in a way where it's very dangerous. But I think it's so like continuing to have nuance and continuing to just have a learner perspective, and being open to the world, even if you disagree with certain things, and just um, obviously while taking care of yourself, because I think that is a whole big part of all of this, is being able to protect your inner flame, like doing what you have to do to preserve who you are, even if you're somebody who's extremely receptive, you'll still want to take care of yourself, because if you take in a lot,
do
there's
you keep in mind, do you keep the need for alternative perspectives in mind when you are uh, curating what goes into the bloom?
yeah, but I'm also not speaking to a conservative audience, so it doesn't really like, I'm also satisfying, but also like speaking to a particular niche, right? So I'm not trying to accommodate every single view out there.
Right.
No, otherwise it wouldn't be the bloom.
No,
you
right.
don't go to you don't go to a restaurant that has, I mean, I wouldn't want to go to a restaurant that has a little bit of everything. I'd want to go to a restaurant like that has
No,
every type of food possible,
you don't order a Chinese. You don't order a hamburger at a Chinese restaurant. I
no,
totally
of course
agree.
not. No.
On the other hand, there's a lot of that there's a diversity of opinion in progressive in various groups. So that's what I meant, right? Like that. It's not, the bloom is not your agenda. Well, it
No,
is, but it's not your agenda. It is an agenda that is rooted in some larger perspective that you're trying to hold on to, right?
exactly. But also I'm listen I mean, what I do is I just consider myself in many ways just like a little vessel where I'm not like find I don't just find things that I'm passionate about. I also think like I also know my community and like what they've asked me for, but also like I can see like literally I see the statistics of like what people are liking one week and what people
Mhm.
really want more of. I get emails from people like, hey, can you put more like financial wellness like classes for investing, like for like women and people that are non-traditional investors. and this kind of stuff. So I mean, it's also just listening to what people want. So and being observant of that. Or no, I'm not imposing like I'm just the one listening. I'm just a listener. I
Well,
think that could be actually a better bio.
so
Listener.
well, if you redo your bio,
Serial
we can.
listener.
If you redo your bio, we can do it. We can do another podcast. But for
That would be
now,
fun.
let's. I think this might be a good place to stop. To at least to stop the podcast. So
Okay.
I'm going to stop recording, and you're going to
Okay.
stop recording, and that guy over there who you don't even know anymore is going to stop
The other
recording.
David Bryan.